Talking Trees with Lily and Jad. Welcome to this episode. Today we're delving into the crucial area of tree stabilization standards, focusing on their importance in urban environments. We'll explore insights from European Standard 02-2022, which highlights techniques for the installation and maintenance of tree crown stabilization systems. Let's jump in.
All right, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be talking about dynamic tree crown stabilization systems. And I know as a professional tree worker, this is probably something that's already on your radar, but we're going to do a deep dive today into some of the nuances, some of the nitty-gritty. We've got a new European standard document we're going to be referencing. And joining me today is, well, he's a veteran in the field, really knows his stuff.
Happy to be here and excited to dig into this stuff. I love the practical applications of all this.
Yeah, and this is a very practical topic. I mean, when we talk about tree crown stabilization, it's all about extending the life of those really valuable trees, right? Those important trees. It's risk management. We want to protect people, property, and of course the tree itself.
Right, exactly. And it's not just about sort of imposing our will on the tree. It's about understanding the tree's own natural processes, figuring out where its vulnerabilities are, and then using those systems to really support the tree in the best way possible.
It's about working with the tree, not against it. And that's where I think dynamic systems really shine. They're not about rigidly locking things in place, right? It's more about kind of guiding and supporting. So what is it? What's the core concept behind dynamic systems?
Yeah, it's kind of like, think of shock absorbers, right?
Right.
You have them in your car. They're meant to dampen the energy, let the car move a little bit. Same thing with trees, right? We don't want to just rigidly brace everything.
Yeah.
We want to allow for some movement, some sway, but reduce the chance of something actually failing, during a big windstorm.
So it's controlled flexibility.
Controlled flexibility, exactly.
Now, looking at this European standard, they talk about materials like polyester, polypropylene, polyamide. What are some of the things we should be thinking about when choosing between those materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the standard's got a really cool table that breaks down the properties of each material. It's almost like a cheat sheet. So like if you're looking at polyester, it's fantastic for UV resistance, really good strength, especially under tension. But if you need to tie knots, that's when its strength really drops off.
Interesting. So knots are a no-no with polyester, basically.
Ideally, yeah, you want to try to avoid them if you can. Use other connection methods if possible.
Okay. What about polypropylene? What are its strengths and weaknesses?
Polypropylene, it's practically immune to moisture, but it's not a fan of the sun. UV will degrade it pretty quickly, so you got to make sure it's treated with a UV protectant. Usually they blacken it for that reason.
So it needs a little sunscreen, basically.
Yeah, a little sunscreen.
Yeah.
And then finally you got polyamide, which kind of sits in between polyester and polypropylene. It's got decent UV resistance, some stretch.
Kind of the middle child, the jack of all trades.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But, no matter which material you choose, these systems aren't, set it and forget it. They need regular checkups, adjustments, just like, a finely tuned instrument.
You've got to keep everything in harmony.
Exactly.
So we've chosen our material. Now, how do we actually get these systems up into the tree? What's the installation process look like?
Well, the standard really emphasizes following the manufacturer's instructions. And that's for good reason. Each system's a little bit different, but there are some universal best practices. First off, make sure there's enough slack in the rope to allow for natural movement and growth. The standard's got a nice visual, figure 12, that shows what that should look like. It can be really helpful to have that visual in mind when you're up in the tree.
I bet. Those visuals are super valuable when you're, 50 feet up in the air.
Yeah.
What else is crucial during that installation process?
Oh, protecting the rope from friction. That's huge. I mean, think squirrels, right? They love to gnaw on things, and even a little bit of wear and tear can really compromise the system over time. So you got to think about that. And then make sure you leave enough rope for adjustments. Trees, they grow, they change. Got to plan for that.
It's like planning for a growth spurt. Now, I was reading about using multiple systems in a single tree. Is that something you encounter often?
Yeah, sometimes a tree just needs a little extra support, right? Its condition might require a combination of stabilization methods. It's like tailoring a suit,
Right.
Providing support where it's needed most. But this does highlight the need for careful planning. You really got to use your judgment, make sure you're not creating a tangled mess in the crown.
Right. You want a symphony of support, not a cacophony.
Exactly.
And speaking of that delicate balance, I noticed the standard mentions different types of systems.
Mm-hmm.
breaking prevention, damage prevention, and then there's this braided system. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah. So breaking prevention, that's your frontline defense, right? It's designed to absorb the forces that could cause a branch to snap. So really about reinforcing those weak points.
So it's all about preventing those catastrophic failures. What about damage prevention? How does that work?
Damage prevention is a little different. It allows for a bit more movement, but it's designed to catch the branch if it does fail. Sort of like a safety net. So you're minimizing the impact if the worst does happen.
So you've got a backup plan.
Exactly.
And what about this braided system? Sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, the braided system is pretty cool. They use it to secure the tops of trees or branches where you don't have a good anchor point. It's kind of like a self-supporting structure. The tree is almost hugging itself, using its own form for stability.
That's pretty amazing. Now, you've been doing this for years. You've got a ton of experience. Are there any particular brands or systems that really stand out to you?
You know, I've tried my fair share over the years, and some definitely rise to the top. The European standard actually has a table 1, that lists some of the most common brands used across Europe.
Oh, perfect. Let's dive into those brands. Our listeners are always on the lookout for reliable systems, tools they can trust.
Okay, so some of the names on that list are Arboricultural, Gemini, Arco, Glystein ropes. Then you have BOA, Cobra, Gefa, TreeSave. Each one's got its strengths, kind of like choosing the right climbing rope. It depends on what you're doing.
Okay, lots of familiar names there. And I bet you've got some good stories from using these systems out in the field.
Oh, yeah. I remember one time using the Cobra system. It was this massive oak tree, and it had a split fork. The main trunk had divided near the base. One of those forks was leaning, and it was leaning towards this historic building. Talk about a stressful situation.
Oh, I bet. A piece of history on the line. That sounds like a pretty delicate operation.
It was. The access was tricky. The branches were incredibly heavy. But we managed to install a multi-point Cobra system. So we had multiple cables strategically placed throughout the crown, all working together with shock absorbers to kind of redistribute the weight, reduce the strain.
So you basically gave this tree a custom-designed suspension system.
Exactly. And it's stories like that that really remind me of another point in the standard. They emphasize the importance of using systems with clear, easy-to-understand instructions. Because when you're dealing with these kinds of situations, complex installations, potentially dangerous, you don't want any room for misinterpretation.
Right. Clear instructions are key for safety and making sure the system actually works as intended.
Exactly.
What about when we're dealing with those really old trees, those veteran trees? Are there specific brands that are particularly well suited for those situations?
Oh, absolutely. If you're working with those wise old giants, Glystein ropes is fantastic. They really understand the unique needs of veteran trees.
It's like they have a special touch for those elder statesmen of the forest.
They do. Their systems are designed to minimize stress on the tree's structure. They provide support without being too restrictive. Remember, those older trees, they've been through a lot. They might have internal weaknesses, decay that we can't even see. So a gentle approach is key.
Right. It's about providing that helping hand. So we've talked about Cobra, Glystein. Are there any other brands that, are worth mentioning that really stand out to you?
Yeah, a few more. So BOA has this really cool feature. They have an indicator thread woven right into the rope. The system gets overloaded, that thread breaks.
No way.
Yeah, it's a built-in warning system.
That's so smart. Like, the tree can tell you when it's struggling. What about Gefa Blue?
Gefa Blue, well, they're known for flexibility. Made of polyamide, which is great for short setups where you need maximum movement, but there's a catch.
Uh-oh.
Polyamide can change length when wet, so you got to be careful with that.
Got it. So not the best choice if there's a chance it'll get soaked a lot.
Exactly. Now, Gefa also offers a polyester rope, Gefa Green, for more standard situations, and they include a stem protector with it.
Nice. They're really thinking about the tree's health.
Definitely. BOA, for instance. They're known for their innovative braided systems, perfect for those situations where you don't have a good anchor point. Remember we were talking about those self-retention systems?
Yeah, like the tree is giving itself a hug.
Exactly. BOA systems are also really easy to install and adjust. Always a plus.
Efficiency is key when you're up in a tree. How about Cobra? What's their specialty?
Cobra systems are known for their strength. They're the go-to if you need maximum support. Maybe a branch is threatening a structure. There's a high risk of failure.
So heavyweight situations, Cobra's your go-to. Got it.
And then there's Gefa. They're a German company, been around for over 70 years. They produce really high-quality tree care products.
Wow. That's quite a legacy.
Yeah.
What makes GAFES systems stand out?
They pay a lot of attention to detail, and they're really committed to sustainability. They try to use environmentally friendly materials and processes whenever possible.
So they're thinking about the health of the tree and the health of the planet.
Exactly. What I'm seeing here is all of these companies, whether they've been around for decades or they're just starting out, they're united by this passion for innovation and this deep respect for trees.
That's right. A love for trees, a desire to protect them. Now, with so many brands and systems out there, it can be kind of overwhelming to choose the right one. So what are some key considerations that our listeners should keep in mind when making that decision?
Well, the first thing you got to do is assess the tree itself. What species is it? How old is it? Are there any visible signs of weakness or decay?
So it's like giving the tree a checkup before prescribing the treatment plan.
Exactly. And you also got to think about the surrounding environment. Is the tree exposed to strong winds, heavy snow loads? Are there any structures or targets nearby that need protection?
Right. Understanding the context, the forces that are acting on the tree. And then, if something were to fail, what are the potential consequences?
Absolutely. And once you have a good grasp of the tree and its environment, then you can start narrowing down your options based on those specific needs. Do you need to prevent a branch from breaking? Are you looking to minimize damage if a branch does fail?
So you're matching the system to the desired outcome.
Right. And of course, budget always comes into play. The availability of materials, the expertise in your area, those are practical considerations.
Right. You don't want to choose a system that's impossible to obtain or install.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reach out to manufacturers, experienced arborists. They can be a great resource when you're trying to figure out what's best for the tree.
Right. Collaboration is key in this field. We can all learn from each other's experiences.
Exactly. This whole conversation really brings up a really important point about tree care in general.
I'm listening.
It's about, shifting our perspective. We need to move from simply treating symptoms to really understanding those underlying causes, the root of the problem.
It's about looking beyond the surface, digging deeper to understand what's really going on with the tree, right?
Right. These systems are amazing, but they're not magic bullets. They're part of a larger, holistic approach. Pruning, soil management, pest control, all of that plays a role.
Right. It's about seeing the tree as a whole, as a complex living organism.
Yeah.
Recognizing all those interconnections.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that our role isn't just about fixing problems, but it's about fostering health and resilience.
I couldn't agree more.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. Talked about the why, the how, the who of dynamic tree crown stabilization. So let's bring it all home for our listeners out there. What are some key takeaways, things they can really apply in their own work?
If I could leave everyone with just one thought, it's that tree crown stabilization. It's a tool, right? It's one piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole picture. It's part of a bigger, a more holistic way of looking at tree care.
Right. It's about seeing the whole tree, the whole environment, not getting tunnel vision on just a single branch or a problem you think you see.
Exactly. You can do amazing things with these systems, but they work best when they're combined with other best practices. Pruning, soil management, pest control, all of that's important.
Right. So it's kind of like a symphony, right? You need all those instruments working together to create that beautiful sound.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And just like a conductor needs to know each instrument, their strengths and weaknesses, we need to understand each individual tree and the environment it's living in.
So it really comes down to continuous learning, right? Staying curious, asking questions, always looking for new information, new ways of approaching these challenges.
Oh, absolutely. This field, it's always changing. There's new research, new technology. We've got to stay ahead of the curve if we want to give those trees the best possible care.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with living, breathing organisms like trees.
I couldn't agree more. And, beyond all that, beyond the technical stuff, there's something else that's really important.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the secret ingredient here?
It's approaching each tree with a sense of respect, of wonder even. These trees, they have so much to teach us if we're willing to listen.
That's beautifully said. It reminds me that we're not just working on these trees, we're working with them. We're partners in ensuring their health and their longevity.
Exactly. And when you approach the work with that mindset, it stops being just a job, It becomes something much more meaningful.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into dynamic tree crown stabilization systems. We hope you've learned something new today, and maybe, just maybe, you've come away with a renewed appreciation for these incredible trees all around us.
Absolutely. Stay curious out there and keep climbing.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope this episode shed some light on the critical standards and practices around tree stabilization, especially for urban areas. Understanding these guidelines helps keep trees healthy and safe in our communities. If you found this episode insightful, consider sharing it with your friends. Until next time, stay rooted in knowledge and keep nurturing those trees.